everyone, and welcome back to the Hormone Genius Podcast. I'm very excited because today I get to interview Teresa. We're going to talk all about Teresa today. We're going to get to know her story. We're going to get to know what makes her tick. And ultimately, we're going to understand her path to this point right now. So just to get us started, Teresa, why don't you begin just by sharing with our listeners just a little bit about you, especially like starting at maybe a younger age into this point you find yourself.
Sure. I would love to do that. Thanks, Jamie. So I am born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm sitting right now still, and grew up in a great family, 6 kids. I'm a cradle Catholic, had a good family life. And as I went on into my young adulthood, I would say like early on, kind of my initial, thoughts around how I got to the place I am in women's health is that I loved everything natural medicine. And it was because my mom was really into Prevention magazine. You don't even know if you remember that, but she always had like holistic kind of books around the house, and she loved natural remedies to things. And I was just fascinated. So I would sit in the bathroom. We always had that old people like magazine rack in the bathroom with like National Geographics and Prevention magazine. And I would just flip through that and just probably sit in there and longer than needed and look through Prevention magazine. So that got me interested in health. And my dad, when I got older, he really, I don't know if he saw that in me, or maybe he was just like, Teresa, you'd make a great nurse, so you're going to be a nurse. So I was like, oh, okay, Dad, I'll be a nurse, But I really loved nurturing things. I was the kid that would find stray animals and bring them home. In fact, the only family dog that we ever had growing up was a stray dog that I took from high school. We found it on our high school campus. I went to an all-girls high school, and this little dog kind of wandered on, ended up being our family dog for 15 years. Wilbur was his name, sweet dog. But I love to take care of like sick, animals, and people recognize that about me. Anyway, I became a nurse. I went into nursing school actually in Iowa. I went to Briarcliff in Iowa. And in college, I played soccer. I was an athlete, so I loved soccer. But I would remember
know that about you.
Yeah, I pretty much played every sport. My dad was a big athlete. In fact, he trained for the Vikings football team. And he was actually in the Hall of Fame in Iowa for Simpson College. My dad was a big athlete. And so we played every sport humanly possible. But soccer was the one I loved the most. And I ended up playing that pretty much until college was finished. So
wow.
Yeah, big soccer player.
Gosh. And you are a good singer too. So you have like the singing gene and the sports gene. You're like a jack of all trades, Teresa.
Yeah. Oh, wait, we had the greatest choir in college too. So yes, I was one of those crossovers, which was unique, being an athlete and a singer. So I loved that. I love my choir friends. Mm-hmm. So anyway, in college, I'll never forget this experience. And I'm going to tell this story because it's kind of pivotal to, I think, me going into women's health. Mm-hmm. But there was a girl on my soccer team when I was a freshman. She was a senior. And, gossip around was that she was pregnant. And I was like, pregnant, again, I didn't know what people get pregnant, just kind of like my world was very sheltered. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I also heard that she was going to have an abortion. And this was like a very kind of quick set of news. Like I found out she was pregnant. And then a friend of mine was like, Teresa, she's going to Omaha to have an abortion tomorrow. And I was someone who was pretty convicted that life, began at conception, and like abortion was not the right thing to do. So I was like, wow, what do I do in this situation? I felt so desperate to save the baby, you could say, to save and to do something. But I didn't know the girl very well. But I did have this experience of my childhood. My mom used to take me to the Planned Parenthood, and we would pray with a group of other Christians, and she would take me there every Saturday. So I was very familiar with going to the abortion clinic and standing in peaceful prayer. So I decided I would drive back to Omaha the next morning, and I would stand in front of that clinic and pray for her. And I wasn't sure what would happen or anything. But I thought, at least I can pray. I felt so sad for her and for the experience. And I remember it was very dark that morning because they do abortions really early. They try to bring those women in before even the sun comes up. And it was really early. And back then, they had security guards kind of everywhere around this particular Planned Parenthood. And I'll never forget standing there and seeing her start to walk up to the entrance of the door. And I was like, there's this moment of, what do I do? And I just yelled out her name. And, this wasn't her name, but it just, for the sake of it, I yelled, Jenny. And she turned. I mean, I yelled it far because she was not close to me at all. And I remember she turned and she looked at me, and that was it. She walked right in. And then security guards surrounded me, and I fell into a puddle of tears.
Oh.
And, I didn't really see her again because it was like the end of our soccer season, and she was a senior, so she graduated. And I didn't know what to do with that experience in my heart, but I just knew there was this thing that happened, that it surrounded pregnancy, and it happened to someone I knew. And that was like a pivotal thing in my life. Well, fast forward 3 years later, when I was a senior, still playing soccer, and this particular girl came back to watch a game. And after the game, I saw her walking down the hill with a baby in her arms. And the baby was like 8 months old, 9 months old. And she was like heading right towards me. And I thought, oh my gosh, why is she coming towards me with this baby? And I knew who she was, and I knew what happened. And she came up to me and she said, hi, Teresa. She said, this is my baby, Zachary. And she put him in my arms. And she said, I just wanted you to meet him. And I knew that I don't think that was it wasn't the same baby. She had aborted her first baby, but she got pregnant again, and she changed her mind. She decided not to abort that baby, and she wanted me to know. And it was at that moment I realized that I had made a change. In a puddle of tears that morning when she had the abortion, I felt like there was nothing I could do to help someone in that situation. I felt helpless. But a few years later, I realized that my presence and my heart that basically said I cared about her did make a difference because she chose life. So that was pretty important for me. And that point, you could say, was where I wanted to go into women's health, and that's where I finished my nursing career. And then I decided that I loved school at that point. I just was like, I loved learning. Everything about medical stuff just fascinated me. So I didn't want to stop learning. And so I decided to get a master's degree and become a nurse practitioner. And in Omaha, there was a particular program at the University of Nebraska Medical Center for women's health nurse practitioner. And I was advised to not go into it by my advisor in nursing school because she knew I was very convicted about my pro-life heart, my values. And she thought, Teresa, you are not going to do well in this environment. And at that moment, I was like, but there's got to be people on the other side. Like, there's got to be women's health people that actually like believe the same way I do, like, why do they all have to believe that abortion is good for women and that contraception is good for women? And so that's kind of, you could say, the journey. But you let me know if you have any questions about that story or thought.
No, I'm like, I'm totally wrapped in. I did not know that part about the friend and then how she had gotten pregnant a second time and just how it was like this unsaid exchange,
Yeah, we never.
You never even talked about it, but she knew, even that you were a distance away. And it could have been anyone. Maybe, someone might think, oh, I don't know who that is. Did they even say my name? But she knew who it was. She knew it was her name.
Yep.
And she came out, and also too, to her credit, like, what courage, for her to come over and say that to you. Wow, that's awesome, Teresa. Oh my gosh. Okay, so young, caring, and tending to animals. I thought that was really sweet and cute, because that didn't leave you. That like that's part of your your thread, your DNA. So then you go to college. You have this experience with this girl. okay, so now, and then you go into your master's, and then you get your women's health nurse practitioner. So now how do you get from that point then to where you're at now? And then also tell us a little bit about your husband, your kids, and then what your husband does too, because I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. So basically in women's health, in my nurse practitioner stuff, I honestly, like, I got into the program and started realizing really quickly it may be hard for me to get a job. I realized, like, particularly women's health was very directed towards, using birth control for every woman's health problem out there. And even honestly, like, I knew my parents used a natural method. Like, I knew they used NFP, but I wasn't really sure kind of what I thought about everything related to that. My mom didn't really talk to me about it. So I had to form myself around natural methods for family planning, kind of like you did in your journey as well. But as I did, and I realized that birth control was being used for every woman's health problem, I was like asking questions. I would ask questions to the professors, well, what if they don't want to be on birth control? Or what if it's like a 15-year-old and the mother didn't want her daughter to take these hormones? And I just never got any satisfying answer. It was like, this is just what we do. We just give these drugs out. And I'm like, this is just, it didn't settle with me right. I was like, okay with the idea that women could choose it. But if they didn't want to choose it, I was not okay that there wasn't an alternative. That just didn't resonate right with me. And so because I refused to go to Planned Parenthood, because I knew what Planned Parenthood was all about at that point, I had to find my own kind of precepting experiences. And I ended up at a clinic where a doctor had been trained in NAPRO technology, which we'll do a future podcast on that. But it was basically about the alternative. It was, how do you practice as in women's health and really treat the body as it is good, as her fertility is good, and try to find an alternative to using birth control for every woman's health issue. And that blew my mind. I was like, wait, this is it. This is the toolbox I need to be able to practice in women's health. Inevitably, what I didn't realize is that the whole heart of NAPRO technology started in my own city, in Omaha, Nebraska. And that was Dr. Thomas Hilger's now it's the St. Paul VI Institute. So I was like, wow, I mean, if I could get a job anywhere, I guess it would be here. And so when I finished my education, I wrote Dr. Hilger's a letter and I said, hey, this is who I am. This is my heart. This is what I believe. And I said, if you've ever thought about having a nurse practitioner, I would love to come talk to you. And you could say the rest is history. The cool thing, and I didn't realize this until later on, but I was born July 25th. And that is the day that basically inspired the whole revolution around NAPRO technology. So in a lot of ways, I feel like God called me to this work particularly. And I know we have that same kind of inspiration in our hearts. And so that's amazing. So just a little bit about my marriage and my family. So I met my husband in 7th grade. Oh my gosh, our story about meeting, I could literally do an entire podcast about it and everybody would love. But we met in 7th grade, but didn't start dating until after college. And I literally graduated my master's program. I got married and was pregnant with my first child, all in like the same, felt like 6 months. And now we have 8 kids 20 years later. So we've been married for 20 years and we have 8 kids, 19 down to 6. And my husband, we've had a unique journey. I stayed at home for a lot of our original early marriage years and raised probably the first 6, you could say. But then my husband went through a series of job changes and we were really not kind of financially doing well. And we just made this choice. I had to work full time. And that was not anything I thought I wanted to do. I really love staying at home, but I love the balance of being able to work and be at home with my kids. And I just thought that's what I want to do the rest of my life. I don't want to ever work full time, but we had to. It was like, it just was a choice I had to make. And so my husband became a stay-at-home dad, which I always joked should never happen because I was afraid one of my children would saw off their fingers in the garage and he would never know it was happening because men can't multitask. So I was like, yeah, I just don't think that's a good idea. But I had to give in and they're all still alive. So kudos to him for that. But yeah, he became a stay-at-home dad. And in about a year or 2 into being a stay-at-home dad, he just had this well, it was one of my kids, is like, he told these elaborate stories, bedtime stories. I mean, they would go on for like an hour and a half. I'd be in bed going, when is this story ever going to end? My kids just loved his stories. And one day, one of my sons said, Dad, you should really write down your stories. And it clicked. He was like, why don't I start writing my stories? And so he wrote his first book, I think about 4.5 to 5 years ago, called The Beef Jerky Gang. And since then, he's written over 44 books for kids and, you know, young kids to middle schoolers. And now he's writing an adult novel series. So just a cool story of a guy that was forced to stay at home and raise our last 2 children from infancy all on his own, and then becomes a local author. So yeah.
Cool. So cool. Okay, so Daniel Kenney would be the author name.
Yes. Yep. Daniel Kenney. Yep. And so that's our crazy life with 8 kids is amazing and crazy and chaotic. And I have 6 boys, and I always say with 6 boys, there's pretty much urine everywhere. And, you know, especially when they're little, the target of the toilet bowl is like moving apparently all the time. Either that, or I'm not sure what they're getting into in terms of medicines or whatnot, because they hit the walls, they hit the floor, they hit all over the place. So
gosh, Teresa, we're potty training our youngest, but he's 3, and that's okay. That's okay. Like our second boy is 3.5, finally like clicked, whatever. So he's 3 and we're trying to potty train him, but it is like interesting. Carpets, we're not so sure. We might need to do a little swip swap because, you know, that carpet loves that urine.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Everywhere. Man, you'll have to tell me some of your carpet cleaning secrets.
I don't think I have any.
Oh, great. Oh, great. You had mentioned how you and Dan met, and that'll be a future podcast. But I'm telling you, for anyone who's listening now, make sure you're looking for that one, because when Teresa and I first had like our actual real like conversation, like actual sit down at a meal, we'll talk a little bit about that too, how Hormone Genius came to be. But that was one of the first stories you told me, Teresa. And I just remember thinking, this girl's one of the funniest like people like I met in a long time. Your story is so funny, like the way you share it. So for any of you guys listening, be sure to like tune into that one because it's hilarious. We should do that. Like we should do like how Teresa met Dan, how Jamie met Justin, because they both are pretty interesting.
I almost think we'll have to bring Dan on for that one, because he tells the story way funnier than I tell it. So I might have to have him sit with me and tell the story.
Oh my gosh, I would love that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, so Teresa, kind of going back to kind of how you're finding yourself here in this space as a women's health nurse practitioner, what would you say is one of the hardest things in being a women's health nurse practitioner, just in terms of how it relates to the culture?
Well, when you first said that statement, the first thing that came to my mind is just the hardest part sometimes is just loss. Like, I mean, women experience in the situation of infertility and miscarriage so much loss. And I've had now 20 years of experience of walking with women in their journeys with infertility and miscarriage. And it's hard, you know. I mean, I cannot empathize with them because I have not gone through loss myself. I have 8 kids and I don't have any miscarriages, honestly. So sometimes it's hard because I feel like I haven't experienced what you've walked through, but I definitely have held a lot of women up, and men up too, for that matter, in loss, and tried to carry them through. And that's just, it's a hard experience. So that's what first came to my mind. But in the culture in women's health, the hardest part is really just the lack of information, I think, that's out there, and feeling the frustration that, you know, women deserve this and they don't have it. And just wanting them to, again, I don't want to say, oh, you have to do it my way in women's health. I mean, and that's not how I would ever approach it. But I do want women to know, it's just like when I was in school, I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good, and they can live in that body holistically. and that there are trained healthcare providers that want to provide that to them. And I feel sad that the culture is just so brainwashed in a sense to believe that this is just all good. And it isn't good. I mean, all these hormones, and I think it's starting to happen where people are waking up a little bit, but oh my gosh, just the massive amounts of synthetic hormones being dumped into people's bodies. I don't know how you can kind of live in the world that we think is organic and we all want to be environmental and kind of put that piece in there and be like, yeah, that works. You know, we all want to like recycle and have no hormones in meat and all this stuff. And you're like, but no, keep shoving it into women's bodies. No big deal. I don't get it sometimes.
Same. I think about like the phrase women's rights, and I'm like, do women not have the right to understand their own body? And I often think about how, you know, it's not a secret that women should be checking our breast tissue. That's not something that is a secret or not, you know, being, you know, it's being shared, I should say. It's being shared from the medical provider to the women. Like, that's something we know, breast self-exam, whatever, self-breast exam. But we're not hearing that we should be aware of what's happening with our reproductive organs. Like, yes, for our breasts, but like in terms of our, you know, our discharge and our cervical mucus, of course, that indicates fertility. But everything else, and I think to myself, there's no pill for breast exams. There's no money to be made. I mean, in my head, that's where my head goes sometimes. I think, you know, you can't make a dime off of telling somebody to check their breast, but you sure can when it comes to you know, the other parts of our female body that are important to understand for our own health. So I just think that that's interesting. When I think about women's rights, we really do have a right to know it all. So what's the big secret sort of thing? And I don't think there's necessarily a secret. I think it's just that we're not being told.
No,
you know?
and doctors aren't being trained either.
Doctors aren't being trained.
Right.
So true.
Yeah. So we, you know, so that's the goal always is, you know, both you and I, we just want to empower people to make better decisions for themselves, not tell people what to do, not judge people, but just to be like, hey, if you didn't know this about your body already, like, we want to share you with this amazing news. And we hope that then we give you options and alternatives and choices to make better decisions about your health and just to respect yourself and all those great things. So
absolutely. Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very cool. Well, thank you, Teresa. This was very entertaining for me, even, because again, us getting to know each other even through these podcasts, and all of our listeners, I'm sure, were just felt the shivers and the chills, especially with the story with that college girl and all that you've gone through. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing your story. And to our listeners, be sure to catch our other episodes where we really dig in to women's health matters.